Good morning, church. How are we doing today? It's great to see everybody here up in the north region. Of course, we have a church going on in 4 different locations this morning. In the east and in the south, we have our teen rally also taking place. And then we have all of those who are doing church at home and joining us live today as we stream this. It's great to see all of you. It's great to have you here with us. And a very good morning to everybody. The fall is now coming. The weather's getting cool. I had to put the walls back up on my Jeep again, and the minute I did that, of course, it's 90 degrees for the next 3 days. As we have church all over the city, and even watching our sister churches and the things going on around the world, we're reminded that it is our season of missions, and we're collecting special missions. And, one thing you guys may not know is that I'm actually a product of world missions, of missionaries going all over the world. My wife, who was my girlfriend in college, she was converted at an all-women's college in Boston called Smith College on her first week of school. And the woman who reached out to her was this Japanese woman named Yuri. And my wife was converted. Then she proceeded to force me to study the Bible, or she's going to break up with me. And then I became a Christian later on. But this thing is that Yuri, she was actually met by disciples who were on the mission field in Japan. So while she was a teenager in Japan, some disciples that came from the U.S. who were planting the church in Tokyo met Yuri. Yuri then went to school in the U.S. and met my wife, and then I became a Christian. And so without the churches in the U.S. sending a mission team to Japan to meet the woman that would meet my wife when she forced me to study the Bible, I would not be here right now. And what's interesting is that years ago, probably about 10 years ago, I was at this conference in Virginia, and it was a conference for church leaders all over the world, so people were there, and so you sit there and you listen to lessons, and then there's these times of fellowship, and we were fellowshipping at some point, and there was this couple sitting behind us, and we got to talking to them, and we were asking about their story, they were asking us about our story, and it turns out that this woman that we were talking to that we'd never met before was the woman that reached out to Yuri, that had helped plant the church in Tokyo, and she had met Yuri. And so my wife and I are almost in tears as we're staring at the woman that's responsible for helping us understand who God was. All of my kids, my marriage, I owe all of it to this missionary moment. And, I think right now as we are finishing up the collection of our special missions, I just want to encourage you, the impact that it has, that we can have in our part of the world to support missions going on in other parts of the world. The effects of this are broad, far-reaching, and they affect families all over the world. So I'm very grateful for special missions. If you haven't had a chance to give, please give this week as we're closing out our missions, our time of missions. Sometimes, I don't know if you guys do this, but I find myself daydreaming quite often about what life could be like. I've thought to myself, what if the whole world were disciples of Jesus? What would it be like just to walk in a world filled with people that follow Jesus? I would think about traffic jams, We'd have so many more traffic jams because there'd always be fellowship going on. And at a 4-way stop, it would just be a paralyzing moment for disciples because everybody would be trying to let everybody else go first, and therefore nobody would go. And, it'd be very hard to get anything done. But I can imagine on the highway, if there's a traffic jam, all the disciples that would be lining the highway, they'd be bringing out food and drinks to those who are in the traffic right there. What a wonderful place it would be if the world was filled with authentic disciples of Jesus. And everyone has dreams like that. But in my dreams, the thing that I most see is peace. They're just being peace. I don't simply mean the absence of war. Of course, you would hope that if the entire world obeyed God and was submissive to God and to his word and to his son, there would be no war. I don't even mean the absence of crime. I don't even mean the absence of poverty and disease. I hope for all of those things. But what I mean is just the absence of conflict, of tension, and of strife between us, between people in this world. I desire peace. I've really taken to fly fishing since I've moved to Colorado. I moved here 2 years ago. I had never done any fly fishing before I moved here, and now it's all I want to do is go fly fishing. Every time I wake up in the morning and I see the mountains in the distance, I gauge when the next time it is I can go up there and go fishing. And there's many reasons I like fly fishing. One of them is that it has gear. And so any endeavor that has gear, I really, really like. I end up looking at it online. I like going into stores, looking at the gear and what's gonna make me look cooler as a fisherman, what's gonna make me a better fisherman, what's gonna make me more looking like the guys fishing and a river runs through it. That's my goal right there. If I could be like those guys, if you give me gear that helps me do that, that would be great. But I also, it appears to my aesthetic side, to that part of my disposition, because there's a romance and there's a poetry to fly fishing that appeals to me. But it's also solitary. I get away from things, but it can be social. You can do it with someone else. And it's usually occurring in some of the most beautiful places I've ever been. But most of all, I think the reason I like fly fishing is because there is peace. I still haven't found a place to go fly fishing where my phone works. And I love that. I've never talked about politics or society or religion while I've been fly fishing. If I stand in a river for 7 hours, to me it feels like 1 hour. I want that type of peace as much as possible. However, while believers are sometimes blessed to have moments of peace in this life, I don't think we can expect to have a life of peace if we're going to follow Jesus. John 15:18-20 says this, "If the world hates you, keep in mind, it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. But as it is, you do not belong to the world. But I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember what I told you, a servant is not greater than their master. If they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, then they will obey yours." This isn't the only time Jesus spoke this way. In reality, pretty much every person in the Bible that endeavored to do God's will was hated by the world that immediately surrounded him or her. As a matter of fact, Jesus talks about this. In Luke 6:22-26, this is in the middle of the Luke version of the Beatitudes. In verse 22, it says, "Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven. For that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets." If you go down to verse 26, it says, "And woe to you if everyone speaks well of you. For that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets." If your goal is to be aligned with and to be loved by this world, then your goals are not the same as Jesus. Now, Jesus came to love the world, not necessarily to be loved by the world. And in that distinction, there is an immense difference. Because the world does not know how to love, nor does it know how to abide by love. So to pursue the world's love is to chase after a deceit and to chase after an illusion. If you follow Jesus, you are courting hatred. The world will often hate you. And that fact, that gnaws at me, because I don't like it when people don't like me. I don't get it. Like, what's not to like? How do you not like me? That bothers me. When I can understand something, I'm okay with it. I don't understand anybody not liking me. And that fact, it really does. It gets to me because I'm tired. I'm tired of conflict. I'm tired of strife. I'm tired of people arguing. I'm tired of people disagreeing. I'm tired of people they stop liking each other because they disagree. I'm tired of mediating. I'm tired of it all. I want peace. When I was a student, this type of conflict used to thrill me. The idea of being persecuted, the idea of being hated for what I believed in, the idea of kind of like standing against the world, that used to inspire, it used to give me energy. I used to love it, but not anymore. I've definitely had enough of it now. The way I see it, unless you agree to align yourself with whatever popular opinion or conviction the world is currently advertising, you're going to be a social pariah and a hated member of the outsiders. There's no way around it. That's the way the world works. Jesus alludes to the fact that this is what is normative for those who actually care about walking with God in this fallen world. And this brings us back to the subject of this month's series. As we try to describe what biblical hope is this entire year, this month we studied out the book of Habakkuk, which is honestly a curious book to study out because Habakkuk is filled with disappointment and dismay. It's filled with complaining against God. You know, this month's book is not a book of Pollyanna theology with cotton candy promises and sugary sentiments. This book is very raw with disappointment, with wounded confusion, with anger at an all-powerful God that doesn't seem to want to act on behalf of those who are just trying to follow him. You know, most of the times in the Old Testament, when we read books by prophets, in those books, the prophets are addressing God's people. They're giving God's people instruction, or they're giving them encouragement, or they're warning God's people to turn from the path that they're on that is on its way to destruction, okay? In the Bible, prophets are most often, almost every single time, a mouthpiece, a conduit from God to the prophet to the people. But that's not the function of Habakkuk. In the book of Habakkuk, the prophet does not address the people. In the book of Habakkuk, the prophet is addressing God. In this book, Habakkuk is speaking only to God, and he's mad. He's upset, and he's dismayed. At the opening of the book of Habakkuk, he is denouncing Habakkuk, the prophet, he's denouncing the corrupt leadership of Israel and asking God, why aren't you doing anything about this? Like, look at this. You can see this. I can see this. I know you can see this. God, do something about this. This isn't the way it's supposed to do. And then God gives him an answer, all right? But it's not an answer the prophet wants to hear. And how often does that happen with us? We pray to God, he answers it, and we're like, I should have been more specific. God tells him, I'm going to deal with the idolatry and the corruption and the wickedness by raising up the Babylonians to punish Israel. I imagine that there followed an awkward silence when Habakkuk heard that answer. Habakkuk addresses God again, even more dismayed than the first time. He explains that the Babylonians are even more corrupt and more evil than the leaders of Israel. Why would you use evil people to do your work? God explains that just because he may use a people in a place like Babylon to accomplish his purposes, it doesn't mean he endorses Babylon. He explains that Babylon's going to be held accountable for Babylon's own sins. All evil will be held accountable before God at the appointed time. But you know what? That's not an easy pill to swallow. And that's where we arrive in the book of Habakkuk, where Habakkuk must accept a difficult truth, that God is working on his own time scale to produce ends that he knows are best, and without informing us of those plans or that timing. And we hate that. We want all the inside information. It's like when you're on a plane. All right, when you're on a plane and there's bad turbulence, it's awful because you feel like we may die. But here's the thing. If you knew at the beginning of the plane ride, if God came to you and said, hey, listen, this plane ride is going to be really bumpy, but guess what? It's all going to be safe. You're going to land safely. No one's going to get hurt. You know what happens to that bumpy plane ride then? You really enjoy it because everybody else is flipping out. And you're like, this is great. Look, you guys are all scared. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Wouldn't it be great if God told you that in life? Hey, there's going to be some hard times, but in the end, it's going to be fine. And then you could just be cool. You could just be Iceman throughout all of life. You know, nothing could shake you, but that's not how God does things. He doesn't give us those answers. This is what he tells Habakkuk. In verse 2 of chapter 2, he says, then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that the herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end, and it will not prove false. Though it will linger, wait for it. It will certainly come, and it will not delay. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright. But the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. Essentially, he says that What is coming for everyone who does evil, who cheat, who slander, who steal, who lie, who sin without repentance? Their due, it's coming. It's already coming. It won't delay. But its arrival isn't something that you can know anything about. So in the meantime, those who don't believe in me will keep on lying. They'll keep on drinking. They'll keep on living a duplicitous lifestyle. They'll do what they've always done. However, the righteous people, they will choose to live by faith. Suffice it to say, one can imagine the struggle that Habakkuk likely had at having to accept those words. Like when we have to accept those words, it's because, we don't know if we're going to make them enough money, or we don't know if we're going to get the grade on a test that we want. We don't know if the person we like is going to like us back, and we don't have the answers, and all of this makes us struggle, right? Habakkuk is struggling because he's worried that his people are going to be killed by the sword by the evil Babylonians. And God's telling him, don't worry about it, just trust me. Yeah, there's going to be some bad times, but the people who are faithful, they'll continue to trust me, even though I'm not giving them any assurances. I can imagine Habakkuk going, God, we're struggling here. We need you right now. We don't need you in the future. We don't need these vague promises. We need answers right now. We need you to make this right so that the world doesn't devour all the people who are trying to do what's good, who are trying to follow you. And to which God answers, hey, it's coming. In the meantime, those who believe in me will continue to live by faith. It's not a satisfying answer. I think it's a frustrating one. When everything seems to be falling apart, that's a frustrating answer. Paul later uses this same statement that Habakkuk makes, both in Galatians and Romans, to deal with similar issues in both Rome and the region of Galatia. In Galatians chapter 3, verse 10, he says this, for all who rely on works of the law are under a curse. As it is written, cursed is everyone who does not continue to do everything written from the book of the law. Clearly, no one who relies on the law is justified before God, because the righteous will live by faith. Okay, I'm going to ask you guys to bear with me for about 5 minutes as I explain a little context here, okay? Because this verse does not make sense given Habakkuk's what Habakkuk is saying. It doesn't make sense Paul leveraging the same words here, okay? So I have to give a little context. Paul is writing here in Galatians to churches. That's a series of churches in the region of Galatia that he personally planted. He physically went there and planted those churches probably about a year and a half before this letter is written. But after he left, some teachers who were also Christians but were of Jewish descent came into those churches and began teaching something that differed from what Paul had originally taught. Essentially, and to somewhat oversimplify the matter, they were teaching the Christians in Galatia that in order to be a Christian and truly walk with God, you had to be Jewish as well. Right? There were a lot of Jews that had already become Christians, but there were a lot of people who were not Jewish who had become Christians. And what the Jewish teachers were coming in and saying, you guys who are not Jewish, who are Christians, yes, you can be saved, but you also have to be Jewish. You have to get circumcised. You have to follow our eating rituals. You have to follow the celebration days. And so Paul spends the lion's share of this book refuting those claims by those teachers. Now, what we've most often misunderstood about this conflict, and if you've been a Christian for any time, you know about the conflict of grace versus law or grace versus works. It's something we've all heard about. That's not what's happening in the book of Galatians. I've heard it said over and over again that these teachers that Paul was opposing were trying to teach a salvation by works, okay? But that's not what the Jews were doing. They weren't trying to teach people that you have to work in order to get your salvation. No good Jew would ever think that they could work enough to earn salvation from God. All right, a theology of earning your relationship with God wasn't a thing amongst the Jews, all right? I doubt any good Jew would have subscribed to that mode of thinking. In reality, this was an issue that had a lot more to do with something we've already touched upon, a desire for peace rather than conflict. See, the teachers that Paul is opposing, what they want is they want peace. They don't want to be in conflict with the world around them. They wanted to avoid a confrontation, and that's why they were teaching what they were teaching. They wanted to secure a peace between them and the cities they were living in. You know, Rome ruled the world at this point. And certainly it ruled the churches that Paul was planting. Even though these were Greek cities, Rome ruled. Rome came into a city and gave the people a choice. We can level you, or you can be a part of our empire. And if you're a part of our empire, you can keep your leaders. You can keep most of your form of government. You need to pay us a tribute. You can keep your religion. Now, the only thing you can't do is you can't create new religions. And the reason that was a rule is because that's how people fomented rebellion. That's how they came up with dissension against the government. They would create a religion that people would get behind to oppose the government. And so Rome said, you can keep everything, but you can't create new religions. Paul claimed that Christianity was not a new religion, and it wasn't. Christianity is the fulfillment of the Jewish religion. The Jews, on the other hand, did not have the same opinion. And they were actually getting pretty jealous of the converts that Paul was making, because Paul was converting prestigious Greek God-fearers, people who had supported the Jewish temple. But now they were hearing the gospel of Jesus, and they were wanting to follow Jesus. And so these wealthy, influential, non-Jewish people were beginning to follow this Christian God, beginning to follow Jesus instead of them. And in their jealousy, they began stirring up trouble for the Christians. They began telling the Romans, hey, this Christianity, this isn't us, this isn't our religion, this is a new thing. They don't follow our days where we fast. They don't get circumcised. They have nothing, they're nothing like us. They're creating a whole new religion. They even claim that their prophet Jesus is a king. So they follow a king that's not Caesar. They're proclaiming a king that's not Caesar. Now, if the Romans took any of these claims serious, it's going to be really big trouble for the Christians. And in many places, it was big trouble for the Christians. Thus, these Jewish Christian teachers began teaching the Gentiles in the Christian church that they needed to get circumcised and follow the patterns of the Old Testament law so that they could claim that they were not starting a new religion. They could prove through the circumcision of the Gentiles that this is the same thing, and they could keep the peace. And Paul absolutely opposes this and denounces these concessions towards peace. If you turn to Galatians chapter 6, verse 12, he alludes to this. He goes, those who want to impress people by means of the flesh are trying to compel you to be circumcised. The only reason they do this is to avoid being persecuted for the cross of Christ. Not even those who are circumcised keep the law, yet they want you to be circumcised that they may boast about your circumcision in the flesh. To Paul, these types of compromises in order to maintain peace with the world were completely unacceptable, because there are long-term repercussions to making compromises. He sees himself and his situation as being very similar to Habakkuk, which is why he quotes him. We live in an evil world. The world around us is bad. It's fallen. It's not a good place. Yet there are always ways of living at peace with this world if we're willing to compromise. It will give us peace for a little while. Because God doesn't always provide an obvious solution to our problems when we're faced with conflict in this world. Sometimes in order to make it better, God makes it worse. That's what he did to Habakkuk. He's going to do that to us. Like, we're going to pray, God, solve this problem. And you're not going to be specific enough. And he's going to make it worse to make it better. And he doesn't give us the answers that we want to soothe our anxiety, our anger, our fear. And the only answer he gives us at times is the righteous will live by faith. They will continue in their faith. Essentially what God is telling Habakkuk and what Paul is telling both the Romans and the Galatians is this: there is no compromise, no easy way out, no path that you can take to bring you peace which doesn't first take you through trials and testing. If your goal is to be admired and to be loved and to be accepted by the world, then you will forever be at odds with the goal of walking with God. I've heard a lot of believers, especially recently, say things like the church has a lot to learn from the world. Implicit in that comment is that the church needs to be humble to all the things that the world has figured out. During my life, the most important lessons I've ever learned have come through people that God has sent to me. Some of them were believers and some of them weren't believers. We become wise by learning what God gives us in this life, what he does through us through this life. He sanctifies us through life. God tells Habakkuk, I'm going to teach Israel something by using the Babylonians, who were pagans, who didn't believe in him. Over and over again, God uses unconventional means to help his people learn lessons. God will use the world to teach us lessons. There's no question about it. But not because there's virtue in the world. Not because the world is good. Not because the world has, outside of the influence of God and the Holy Spirit, discovered a way to meet human need. God uses the world to humble us. He doesn't use the world as an example for us to follow. Instead, what God says over and over again is this: if you follow me, the world will hate you. There's no getting around it. Period. Just like Jesus, there will be moments when the world celebrates you. Isn't it awesome when the world does like us? Like you have these moments like, when we serve the poor and the needy, when we're good neighbors, when we go out of our way to help the oppressed, when we go out of our way to help those who are in a weakened condition, when we're charitable, when we give of ourselves, when we sacrifice. You know what? There's moments at times where the world looks at that and celebrates that for like 5 minutes. All right? And then it goes right back to hating us. And there's no getting out of it. And for whatever reason, we have become obsessed with trying to get the world to like who we are. More even than trying to seek God's own approval of us. By and large, if you walk the path at just the right time as you pursue God's will, no matter how noble your intentions, no matter how blameless your path, no matter how much you pursue a life of peace and charity, the world is going to try and bury you. Jesus was perfect. Perfect. There's no flaw in him. There's no part of his life where you go, he probably could have done that better. He was perfect. He loved people in ways you never will be able to. He understood people in ways that you cannot understand people. He gave to people exactly what they needed. He healed the sick. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we could go around and just like, COVID, there you go, you're better now. You can't see, you can now see. One would think if we could walk around and do that, the world would absolutely love us. But Jesus did that. Jesus defended the oppressed. He fed the hungry. And those same exact people that he helped turned their back on him, and in the end, they shouted, "Crucify him." Because at just the right moment, the world told a narrative about Jesus and about his motives that weren't true. It wasn't fair. And it incited the ever-present bloodlust that humanity possesses to watch a person suffer. Period. That's the world. There's nothing to learn from there. God will send you your lessons. There's no question about it. He will send you wise people, both believers and non-believers. But the world as a whole, the world hates us. All right, that's the promise that Jesus makes to us. Christians in our culture, when I say our culture, I mean like as Americans, we've enjoyed a long period, and I mean a very long period of ease. All right, our morality, our Christian morality has historically not only been accepted, but endorsed by popular sentiment. For most of our history in this country, Christianity has been upheld as like, this is a good morality. This is what we should follow. It used to be taught in schools. We have never been oppressed in any sort of meaningful way by our own government for what we believe. For hundreds of years, our way of life has been noted as ideal and normative. I mean, that's awesome. God blessed for a long period of time, so much peace. And during that time, Christians in both name only and those who were genuine were complacent. Christians have acted superior and arrogant. They have been smug and without compassion. They have been ignorant and they have been unaware. And they have had the liberty to do so because what they believed was part of the dominant culture. And that time is now ending quickly. And because so many have grown so used to being loved and accepted by the world around us, they want to make compromises in what we believe as a fellowship in order to retain the comforts and the privileges that go along with belonging to mainstream culture. The righteous will live by faith. That's our answer. That's the only one we get in this world. We have promises, and the righteous will live by the faith of those promises. In that answer, we have to persist. There's no escaping the struggles before us. Man, it's so fun to daydream about the whole world being Christians. It's awesome to think, man, at some point, when God redeems the whole world, we're going to perfectly understand one another. Like, have you ever had a difficult conversation with something and you're just not connecting with that person? Like, you can't understand them, they can't understand you, you just want to take a nap during the conversation because you're exhausted. There's going to come a time where that's never going to happen again. When God redeems everything, we'll perfectly understand one another. We'll all care about the right things at the right moment. It's going to be amazing. We're going to bring lemonade out to people in traffic jams. It's going to be great. Four-way stops are just going to be, right, we're going to have to get rid of them. We're going to have to do rotaries, and that's it, because the four-way stops won't work for Christians. It's going to be great, but you know what? Until that time, the righteous have to live by faith. We are faced with great struggles in front of us. At some point, you're going to be forced to choose God or to compromise in order to retain your peace with this world. You may be able to delay some of the inevitable conflicts that are facing you, but eventually your faithfulness is going to be tested for what it truly is. You just can't run forever. You know, I was in Chicago, there's this region of the church that I led. We used to do a camping trip the weekend after Memorial Day weekend, every single year, for the 12 years I was there. And there were 3 years in a row, I'm not lying, where a tornado went within a mile of our camping site the weekend that we went camping. It was incredible. I just couldn't even believe it, all right? One of the times was at night. So, you know, the tornado had changed course, and like we were being warned that it was going to hit the campsite. All right, and so, you know, kids are screaming, people are crying, you know, they're going into the bathrooms, and I'm looking at at the time I had 4 kids, I was like, this isn't going to work. And so I was like, you know what, guys, what we're going to do is we're just going to get in the van, and we're just going to drive south. All right, we're just going to, you know, we've got about 20 minutes before the tornado is supposed to get here. We're just going to drive south. We'll be 20 miles away at that point. We'll be fine. So I get in the van, and we start driving. And, you know, the kids are nervous. Every time there's lightning, they start, like, whimpering a little bit. And I'm like, guys, we're fine. We're escaping the tornado. Now, on the radio, the entire time on the radio, they're saying, you know, like there'll be music for a little bit, and then like 45 seconds into the song, they'll be like, beep, beep, beep. You know, and they'll give you a tornado warning. The National Weather Service has broadcast a tornado warning for the residents, and they kept saying St. Mary's. If you are in St. Mary's, go to a basement or shelter. Do not go outside. Do not get in your car. All right, now St. Mary's was like 5 minutes from where the campground was, all right? I had been driving south for like 10 minutes already, and so I was well away from this area, okay? My wife's getting paranoid. She's like, maybe we should pull over at one of these random houses and ask if we can go inside their basement. And I was like, honey, no, we're not gonna just go into a stranger's. They could be killers. They could be serial killers. We could be escaping the tornado right into the clutches of cannibals or something like that. And so I was like, listen, tornadoes, they're not like sorcerers. They don't like disappear and then reappear chasing you, all right? They're along a set path. I've been driving the opposite direction going south. We're fine, all right? Now, here's the thing. I had no idea where I was, okay? I just knew I'd been driving for a while, and now I was running out of gas, okay? So I got to stop for gas, but I'm trying to figure out, like, when's going to be the best moment to break this bit of news to my family, okay? And so finally, after like 15 minutes of driving, we're well away from the campsite at this time. I go, hey guys, listen, I got to get gas. My wife's like, what do you mean you got to get gas? I was like, why? We need gas. And she's like, well, okay, just hurry up. Don't fill it up all the way. Just hurry up and get gas. I was like, okay. I can see the lights from a town up ahead, okay? I'm just going to stop there. I'm going to get gas, and we'll be out of there, all right? We drive up to the town. Now, in the Midwest, every town has a water tower, okay? And on that water tower is the name of the town. It might have the high school mascot or something like that, but it's got the town. We're pulling up to this. I've been driving for 20 minutes at this point. I'm so far away from the campsite. I drive up, and the town just says, "Welcome to St. Mary's." I thought the spirit was going to leave my wife's body. You know, there's no one outside. Like, people are nailing, like, boards to their windows and stuff like that. I pull up to the gas station. The guy comes out like, dude, what do you need? I was like, I need gas. He's like, there's a tornado in like 2 minutes. I was like, yeah, I'm going to need some gas. Now, luckily, the tornado changed course a little bit. It didn't come through St. Mary's. We escaped. We got away. On the way back to the campsite, we're driving. So this is like an hour later. I'm driving in the road, and I see something in the road on the way there, and it was a house. The tornado had blown a house into the middle of the road. And so there was just this house in the middle of the road. And, you know, sometimes it doesn't matter how far, how fast, how well you run from conflict. It's going to find you. It's going to find you. You cannot escape the hatred of the world. You can't. You have to make peace with it in your own heart. You have to choose righteousness and faithfulness. Jesus died upon a cross. He did nothing wrong. He loved people. He knew it was coming. He told us it was coming. He's warning us. It's coming. People will hate you because of me. And you have to make a choice. You can align yourself with being at peace with the world and compromising what you believe, or you can walk with me and trust me. And yes, there will be struggle. And yes, there will be persecution. And yes, people will hate you and they'll ostracize you because of me. But hope is coming. Peace is coming. But you have to trust me. I trust a man willing to die for me. I trust a man who did die for me. That's what he's asking us to do now. Let's go ahead and pray for communion. God, thank you so much for the hope that you give to us. God, help us to be a people that lives by our faith. I know that the righteous, you say, will always trust you. God, help us to trust you. Even as the world lashes out, even as there is so much division and dissension and heartbreak and hurt, God, help us to trust you. When we're scared, when we don't know what to do, when we don't know what to say, help us to hold to your word and hold to you. God, right now as we take up communion and we take the bread, we remember the way that Jesus lived. Even as people hated him, he loved his neighbor. It didn't matter what the people around him thought about him. It didn't matter what they believed. It didn't matter how they lived. Jesus continued to love people. Even as he's dying on the cross, he's asking you to forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. God, as we take up the bread, help us to love our neighbors in this life and to follow that example. And as we take up the wine, Father, we remember the blood that Jesus spilled for us. That's sacrifice. God, that is our North Star right there. Help us to be sacrificial in our own lives. Help us to make sacrifices for our family, for our fellowship, for our community, all in your name, all to do the good work that you need done in this world, Father. Help us to be your ambassadors. Thank you so much for your son's sacrifice and the hope that it gives us. Help us to be those who can bring hope to this world as well. Help us to rely on you and to live by faith. I love you. It's in your son's name I pray. Amen.